Hello, this is Miss Ivy, and I will be your reading teacher for this week. All the books that we will be reading this week will be centered around summertime, summer vacations, and places you can travel or visit during the summertime that you would not ordinarily be able to do during the school year. So, the first book that we're reading is The Relatives Came by Cynthia Radland and illustrated by Stephen Gamble. So, let's begin. It was in the summer of the year when the relatives came. They came up from Virginia. They left when their grapes were nearly purple enough to pick, but not quite. They had an old station wagon that smelled like a new car, and in it they put an ice chest full of soda pop and some boxes of crackers and some bologna sandwiches. And up they came from Virginia. They left in they left at 4 in the morning when it was still dark outside, before even the birds were awake. They drove all day into the night, and while they traveled along, they looked at the strange houses and the different mountains, and they thought about their almost purple grapes back home. They thought about Virginia, but they thought about us too, waiting for them. So they drank up all their pop, they ate up all their crackers, and traveled up all those miles until finally they pulled into our yard. Then it was hugging time. Talk about hugging. Those relatives just passed us all around their car, pulling us up against their wrinkled Virginia clothes, crying sometimes. They hugged us for hours. Then it was into the house and so much laughing and shining faces and hugging in the doorways. You'll have to go through at least four different hugs to get from the kitchen to the front room. Those relatives. And finally, after supper, two or three times around until we all got a turn at the table, there was quite quiet talk, and we were in twos and threes through the house. Now, the relatives weren't particular about beds, which was good since there weren't any extras. So a few squeezed in with us, and the rest slept on the floor, and some went with their arms thrown across the closest person, or some with an arm across one person and a leg across the other. It was different going to sleep with all these new breathing in the house. The relatives stayed for weeks and weeks. They helped us tend to the garden and they fixed any broken things they could find. They ate up all the strawberries and melons. Then they promised we could eat up all their grapes and peaches when we came to Virginia. But none of us thought about Virginia much. We were so busy hugging and eating and breathing together. Finally, after a long time, the relatives loaded up their chests and headed back to Virginia at 4 in the morning. We stood there in our pajamas and waved them all off in the dark. We watched the relatives disappear down the road. Then we crawled back into bed that felt too big and too quiet and fell asleep. Now, and the relatives drove on all day long into the night, And while they traveled along, they looked at the strange houses in the different mountains, and they thought about the dark purple grapes waiting at home in Virginia. But they thought about us too, missing them, and they missed us. And then they were finally home in Virginia. They crawled into their silent, soft beds and dreamed about the next summer. The end. All right, so let's take a look at some questions. Where did this story take place and how do you know? Do you know? Hmm. Well, the story took place. Did I hear somebody say that the story took place? It was just summertime at the relative's house. And we know this because they were all wearing shorts and they spent a lot of time outside and they stayed for weeks and weeks and weeks. So we know it had to be summertime. All right, let's look at the second question. Ask yourself, think back to the very beginning of the story. The relatives traveled from Virginia. What happened when they first got there? When they first got out of the car? Did I hear someone say hug? Yes, they did. They hugged and they hugged. They were so happy to see their relatives. Now let's think back to the end of the story. Why did the beds feel too big and too quiet? Anybody? I know you said that the relatives had gone back home, and that means that they did not have to share their beds. How did you enjoy that story? And now I want you to just think about a time where you went to visit relatives or where relatives came to visit you. And you will be kind of incorporating some of these ideas into your writing this week. All right. I hope you enjoyed the story.